I never imagined I'd sleep on a porch at 28. Not after graduating summa cum laude. Not after working 3 jobs to help pay off the mortgage on a building I didn't even own. But there I was, curled up under a threadbare blanket outside the family duplex I once thought of as home. Rain had started falling just before midnight, soaking the cushions of the lawn chair that became my makeshift bed. Meanwhile, my younger brother Ryan lounged in the penthouse upstairs with Spotify blasting, sipping imported whiskey like royalty, with no concern that his own sister was shivering 10 feet below him. It all started a few months ago, when my parents temporarily asked me to move out of my childhood room so Ryan could adjust to adult life after his brief stint in rehab. According to my mother, he needed space and structure. 2 things I apparently didn't deserve. My belongings were boxed up and moved into the garage without warning, and my keycard access to the penthouse elevator was revoked. I tried reasoning with them. "I've paid rent here for 9 years, I reminded them. "I even covered your mortgage during COVID when you couldn't." But my father simply shrugged. "We never asked you to," he said. "You did that out of guilt. Ryan's family. You're just here." That was the moment something in me cracked. It wasn't just the words. It was how calmly he said them. Like I was a tenant, a house guest. Not his daughter. Not the one who cleaned my mother's wounds after her fall. Not the one who stayed up all night tutoring Ryan through high school math so he could graduate. I was just here. They didn't even offer the garage with a mattress. Number that was Ryan's new gym. I was told I could rest on the porch for a while, since I was so independent. My mother actually said that with a smile. A smile. The night I moved out of my own room, I remember Ryan tossing me a pillow like it was a joke. "At least you got a roof," he smirked. "Some people pay to camp." And my parents laughed. I didn't cry that night. I refused. I lay on that porch, staring at the cracked ceiling and told myself, "Remember this feeling. Burn it into your bones. One day, this pain will be useful." They didn't know I had been quietly saving for years, that my job as a commercial leasing analyst wasn't just a cubicle gig, that I had been watching this building, our building, increase in value, and that I had quietly set up a trust to secure a purchase if it ever went on the market. They thought I was powerless, a porch sleeper, a charity case under their roof. But that very week, the owner of the building next door, Mr. Coleman, the same man who'd seen me crying in my car after work one night, called me. His words were simple. "I'm retiring, and I've been watching you work your tail off for years. You're smart. You care. You want to buy this block, don't you?" I blinked. "What do you mean, this block?" He chuckled. "Your building's mortgage has been resold 4 times. It's a mess. But with the right offer and the right lawyer, you can own all of it, including your parents' lease." For the first time in months, I smiled. Not the forced "don't worry about me" smile I wore every day, but a real one. Because suddenly, the porch didn't feel like punishment. It felt like the launch pad of a comeback, and they would never see it coming. The next morning, I walked into work with swollen eyes and a silent fire behind them. Nobody knew what I was planning. Not my boss, not my coworkers, and certainly not my family. But every spreadsheet I touched, every investment report I ran, every call I took with developers and brokers, it all had one goal now: to take back my worth brick by brick. While my parents decorated the penthouse for Ryan's fresh start, I was signing NDAs with lawyers and gathering the building's debt portfolio through public records. I discovered my name was never added to any lease, despite paying for 9 years. No receipts, no records, just trust. That same trust they weaponized against me. They mocked me for journaling every expense, but it was that habit that helped me build a paper trail strong enough to make a case. I had kept every Venmo receipt, every email from utility bills I paid in their name. It wasn't petty anymore. It was evidence. At dinner one night, my mom glanced at me from the head of the table. "You still moping out there like some wet dog?" She laughed. My dad didn't even look up. Ryan just poured himself another drink and tossed me the leftovers. You know you don't belong upstairs. I took the plate, smiled, and whispered, Not yet. That night I met with Mr. Coleman again, this time with my attorney beside me. We reviewed documents until midnight. It was real. The entire block, 3 connected buildings, was about to be mine. And with that, the deed to the very home I once begged to stay in would belong to the woman they said didn't deserve a room. By Friday, the purchase agreement was signed. Quietly, legally. No one needed to know. Not yet. But as I stared at the ink drying on that final page, a thought burned in my chest. They left me on the porch like trash, but this trash just bought the whole damn building. And I wasn't done yet. The morning after the final papers were signed, I walked past the building like any other tenant. Same cracked sidewalk, same peeling paint, same scent of cinnamon rolls drifting down from Mrs. Geller's bakery on the corner. But it felt different now, because every brick, every window, every rude glance from my father was now part of something I owned. The porch where I had slept was still cluttered with storage boxes. Mine, ironically. They never offered me a closet, just this sad little corner with mildew creeping up the walls. I stared at the faded welcome mat that once mocked me with every freezing night and sweltering morning. That mat was still there. I wanted to burn it. Instead, I knocked. My brother answered the door shirtless, grinning. Morning, porch princess, still playing Cinderella? I held up a letter. This is your 30-day notice, effective immediately. He blinked, laughter frozen halfway across his face. What the hell is this? You're being evicted, along with Mom and Dad. The building has a new owner. I stepped forward and placed the envelope firmly in his hand. Me. He looked past me, expecting some hidden camera crew or a prank, but there was no one, just the truth, raw and final. My mother appeared behind him in a silk robe, her hair pinned, face creased with confusion. What is this nonsense? She barked. You're our tenant. You don't get to serve papers. I'm your landlord now, I said, voice calm, eyes cold. And you've all violated multiple lease codes. Illegal occupancy, verbal harassment, misuse of utilities. Your grace period ends in 4 weeks. Then you're out. You can't do this, my dad muttered from inside, stepping out of the living room with his cane and his disbelief. Oh, but I already have, I replied. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents were statues. My brother's arrogance wilted right there in the hallway. I turned to leave. That evening, the messages began. First from Ryan, then my mother. Then even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone suddenly wanted to understand my side of things, as if my side hadn't been the porch floor beneath their feet all along. One text from my aunt read, "Blood is thicker than deeds." I responded, maybe, but a deed puts a roof over your head. Blood didn't. Over the next few days, the building changed. Tenants, who had once pitied me, started smiling when I walked by. I posted notices for renovations, repairs, and upgrades. The broken elevator my brother refused to fix? It was already scheduled for replacement. The laundry machines that only worked when kicked? I had new ones coming in next week, but I saved their unit for last. I wanted them to feel every moment of living under the thumb they used to press down on me. One night, I heard my mom crying through the walls. She whispered, "How did she get the money? Oh!" As if I hadn't earned every cent while they mocked me. As if I hadn't bled for the chance to be more than their family embarrassment. But the real answer wasn't money. It was memory. I remembered everything. I remembered the time my mom gave my brother a brand new leather couch for his birthday, while I sat on the porch eating leftover noodles from a takeout container. I remembered the night it stormed so hard that my blankets were soaked, and instead of inviting me inside, they handed me a plastic tarp and told me to Stop being so dramatic. I remembered every time they had guests over and introduced me as just the tenant, their faces beaming as they bragged about Ryan's promotion, his penthouse, his car, his girlfriend, his everything. And I remembered how I smiled through it all. Because I knew I'd get out. I knew I'd make it. And I knew one day I wouldn't just escape their house. I'd own it. That day had come. And now, every passive-aggressive remark they'd ever made echoed back at them through the halls they no longer controlled. The best part? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I walked in, clipboard in hand, and acted like any other professional landlord. Firm, polite, unemotional. Because if there's one thing people like my family can't handle, it's when the person they underestimated no longer needs to yell to be heard. I walked past the kitchen where I once begged to eat leftovers, past the living room where Ryan's birthday banners used to hang while no one even remembered mine. I opened the cabinets, empty, not of food, but of memories that mattered. They had filled this home with cruelty, entitlement, and silence. Now I was filling it with something else. Freedom, justice, peace, and yes, vengeance. The kind that doesn't explode. The kind that unfolds slowly. 2 weeks after I served the notice, they were still in denial. Ryan's checking with his lawyer? My mother had scoffed, arms crossed, refusing to pack a single box. You can't just come in here and act like you own the place. I don't act like I own it, I replied. I do own it. Ryan, of course, threw a tantrum worthy of a spoiled child. You think this makes you better than us? You're still nothing, just a glorified paper pusher who got lucky. I didn't flinch. I'd spent too many nights freezing on that porch to let his words burn me now. They stalled the move out for as long as they could, called me every name imaginable behind closed doors, then pretended like they were the victims. My mother even tried crying to my building manager, painting herself as the poor, sweet older woman being thrown out by her cold-hearted daughter. But it didn't work. Not this time. I had all the paperwork, I had the signatures, I had the deed. They were tenants now. And their lease expired. Meanwhile, I renovated the building, painted over the walls that once held their judgmental whispers, replaced the couch I was never allowed to sit on, ripped out the carpet where Ryan spilled wine and blamed it on me, then made me pay for it. Room by room, I took it back. My childhood, my dignity, my voice. One evening, I hosted a quiet gathering for the other tenants, people who'd lived in the building long before I ever took control. A kind elderly couple, a single mom and her little girl, a college student struggling to afford rent. I lowered rent slightly, fixed the elevator they'd all complained about for years, and promised them I'd be nothing like the landlords before me. They cried. Not because of the lower rent, but because someone finally cared. Meanwhile, my parents sat in their unit upstairs, bitter, confused, watching me from behind curtains like I was a stranger in their story. But I wasn't. I was the story now. Ryan tried to stage a final power play. He threw a massive party, the kind he used to have when I was locked out on the porch, watching through glass. He blasted music, filled the place with smoke, and told everyone, "She's bluffing, she's just mad." He didn't know I'd installed new security cameras and alerted the police in advance. They arrived with paperwork in hand. The party ended before midnight. So did his pride. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, where the floors creaked and the water ran rusty for a minute before clearing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I started freelancing as an interior designer, taking on one-room gigs for cafes, pet shops, even a hair salon. Word of mouth carried my name faster than I ever expected. And with every room I transformed, with every smile I brought to someone's face, I remembered the night I shivered on that porch, invisible to the family who was supposed to protect me. A year passed, then 2. I still saw their parties online, my brother showing off his penthouse life, my parents bragging about how proud they were of him. Never a mention of me, not even a birthday call. I became a ghost in their version of the family, but I didn't disappear. I evolved. By year 3, I'd launched my own firm. I got my first commercial project, redesigning a boutique hotel downtown. It was there I met Mr. Klein, the kind of man who walked into a room and made silence look powerful. He owned several buildings across the city, including the one my parents and brother still lived in. We talked about color palettes, space optimization, and eventually, real estate. One day, after months of working together, he looked at me and said, "I'm retiring soon. Ever thought about owning a place of your own?" I didn't just think. I acted. When the opportunity came to purchase the building where my parents and brother lived, yes, the very one where I was once denied a warm bed, I made the offer. Not through loud announcements or drama, quietly, legally, efficiently. The paperwork was signed. The deed was in my name. And then came the notice. 60 days. It was standard professional, nothing personal. But to them, it was everything. My mother called me in a frenzy. "You can't be serious," she cried. "This is our home." "No," I said calmly. "It's mine now. And I think it's time I stopped sleeping on the porch of my own worth." She choked on silence. My father tried threats. He always did when he had nothing else. My brother? He called me a vindictive witch. I let it all roll off, because beneath the insults was panic. They knew the truth. The girl they pushed outside had built a kingdom. And now, she held the keys. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, where the floors creaked and the water ran rusty for a minute before clearing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I started freelancing as an interior designer, taking on one-room gigs for cafes, pet shops, even a hair salon. Word of mouth carried my name faster than I ever expected. And with every room I transformed, with every smile I brought to someone's face, I remembered the night I shivered on that porch, invisible to the family who was supposed to protect me. A year passed, then 2. I still saw their parties online, my brother showing off his penthouse life, my parents bragging about how proud they were of him. Never a mention of me, not even a birthday call. I became a ghost in their version of the family. But I didn't disappear. I evolved. By year 3, I'd launched my own firm. I got my first commercial project, redesigning a boutique hotel downtown. It was there I met Mr. Klein, the kind of man who walked into a room and made silence look powerful. He owned several buildings across the city, including the one my parents and brother still lived in. We talked about color palettes, space optimization, and eventually, real estate. One day, after months of working together, he looked at me and said, "I'm retiring soon. Ever thought about owning a place of your own?" I didn't just think, I acted. When the opportunity came to purchase the building where my parents and brother lived, yes, the very one where I was once denied a warm bed, I made the offer. Not through loud announcements or drama, quietly, legally, efficiently. The paperwork was signed. The deed was in my name. And then came the notice. 60 days. It was standard, professional, nothing personal. But to them, it was everything. My mother called me in a frenzy. "You can't be serious," she cried. "This is our home." "No," I said calmly. "It's mine now. And I think it's time I stopped sleeping on the porch of my own worth." She choked on silence. My father tried threats. He always did when he had nothing else. My brother? He called me a vindictive witch. I let it all roll off. Because beneath the insults was panic. They knew the truth. The girl they pushed outside had built a kingdom. And now she held the keys. And then the letter started coming. My brother's lawyer tried to argue tenancy rights. But the lease was in my father's name. and he'd never paid a dime of actual rent in over 10 years. Everything was under the table, untraceable. They were squatters with entitlement issues, and I was their new landlord. They offered to buy it from me. I declined. They offered to pay rent. I raised the price to market rate. They asked for sympathy. I reminded them of the night I was left in the cold. That building became more than real estate. It became my justice. I walked through the halls with contractors, inspecting pipes and wiring. I passed my brother in the stairwell once. He looked away, pretending to be on his phone. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the smirk. They weren't just losing an apartment, they were losing the illusion of control. My old room, the one I was locked out of for not being good enough, was now my office. I had it painted with warm earth tones and natural light streaming through the windows. I sat behind the desk. They said I'd never earn, sipping espresso from the same porch where I once cried. The locks had changed, and so had I. It took them less than a week to start packing. My mother, once so proud of her curated crystal collection, now wrapped each piece in old newspaper like it was a chore. My father paced the hallway, barking at movers like they were the reason for his downfall. And my brother? He slammed doors, cursed, and said things like, "She thinks she's better than us now." But the truth was, I didn't think I was better. I just knew I deserved more than to be treated like less. On the morning of their final day, I walked up the front steps they once refused to let me cross. I knocked, not out of spite, but closure. My mother answered, her mascara smudged, her mouth set in that familiar frown. "What?" she snapped. "I just came to say goodbye," I said. "To what?" she hissed. "Your family." I looked past her at the half-packed boxes, the empty walls, the echo of entitlement being boxed up. "No," I replied, "to the version of me that ever begged for a place at your table." My brother appeared in the background, arms crossed. "You'll regret this," he growled. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I turned and walked back to my office. From my window, I watched as the moving truck pulled away. It felt surreal, like watching the final scene of a movie I'd spent years suffering through. Only this time, I was the one holding the camera. Later that evening, I hosted a gathering in the building's newly renovated common room. I invited my team, a few tenants, and the carpenter, who once fixed the stairs with such quiet care. We toasted to fresh starts, to respect, to never being left in the cold again. And as I laughed among people who saw me, not for what I lacked, but for what I brought, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. The next day, I walked through the empty apartment my family had vacated. It still smelled like my childhood, lemons, dust, and denial. But the air felt lighter now. I opened the closet where my childhood trophies had once been shoved behind my brother's, gone. I found a dusty photo album left behind on a shelf. I opened it. There we were, all of us. My brother front and center, my parents beside him. And in one picture, one meant to be a family portrait, I had been cropped out. Not accidentally, not digitally, physically. The edge was jagged, as if they'd cut me out with scissors. I held the photo for a long time, not with tears, but with understanding. They hadn't just erased me from the frame, they'd erased me from their narrative. So I flipped the album closed and tucked it into a box labeled "for storage," not for revenge, not for pain, just to remind myself how far I'd come. Because the girl they made sleep on the porch now owned the address, and her story was just beginning. 3 weeks after they moved out, a notice came from my father's lawyer, a request to negotiate. Apparently, they wanted to buy the penthouse, the same one they never let me enter. The irony was almost poetic. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I sent the notice to my assistant with a note. Reject. Market value plus 40% if they insist. Cash only. Word started to spread. A few of my parents' old friends and my brother's acquaintances reached out. Curious, some sympathetic, others trying to leverage connections. One message read, "I heard you're the new boss around there. Good for you. They always underestimated you." I didn't reply. Their silence when I needed them spoke louder than their sudden applause now. Meanwhile, I turned my focus to the building. The porch I once slept on, I transformed it into a serene community reading nook with flowering vines and fairy lights. Where I used to cry silently, neighbors now gathered with books and coffee. It became the heart of the building, warm, welcoming, and mine. In the penthouse, I created a private office and meditation room. The same space where my brother once hosted parties now smelled of eucalyptus and peace. I commissioned a local artist to paint a mural across the main wall. A girl, small and shivering on a porch, surrounded by shadows. Above her, a glowing house with one open window. The message was clear. Every locked door will one day be yours to unlock. Then one day, as I was reviewing tenant applications, a name stood out. Kevin Jameson, my brother. I blinked. My assistant confirmed it. He had submitted an application for a 2-bedroom unit. My heart thudded in my chest, not out of fear, but a strange mix of amusement and disbelief. He'd included a cover letter. Recent challenges have made me reflect, hoping for a fresh start. I scheduled an interview, not to humiliate, but to witness the full circle. He walked into my office looking smaller. No designer clothes, no smugness, just him and his discomfort. "I didn't realize this was your office," he muttered. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded. "The building's changed, so have I." He nodded. "I see that now. I just need a place." I stared at him for a moment. The boy who once laughed as I shivered outside, now asking for warmth inside. "I'll have to think about it," I said. He left quietly. And I sat there, not with power, but with clarity. Forgiveness was mine to give. But access? That had to be earned. I didn't approve his application. Not out of revenge, but because I finally realized something. I wasn't here to fix what they broke. I was here to build what they never could. I wrote him a note instead. No bitterness, no theatrics. Just a folded piece of paper delivered through my assistant. It read, "There are shelters 3 blocks down. I suggest you try there." That's where I started. It was signed with my name. No titles, no emotion. Just truth. The next day, my father showed up. He stood outside the building for almost an hour. He didn't knock. He didn't ask. He just looked around at the flower-filled porch, the polished windows, the welcome board that now read, "Owned and operated by Elena Shaw." I watched him through the security camera feed in my office. I saw the way his hands trembled as he reached into his coat and pulled out a worn envelope. He slid it under the front door. Inside was a photo, an old family portrait, one I had forgotten even existed. We were younger, happier maybe, before things went bitter, before favoritism carved trenches between us. On the back, scrawled in my mother's handwriting, "You were always meant to shine. We were just too blind to see it." I didn't cry, I didn't crumble. I simply walked to the front desk, picked up the photo, and filed it in a drawer labeled "Past." Because that's what it was, a chapter, not the whole book. Later that week, I hosted a community dinner on the rooftop. The same rooftop where my brother used to throw private parties and lock the doors behind him. Now, laughter floated under string lights. Tenants from all walks of life brought food, played music, shared stories. At the head table, I sat surrounded by people who never once called me too sensitive or too emotional, just real. One of the new tenants leaned over and asked, "What made you want to buy this building?" I looked around at the view, the city skyline, the porch below, the life I built brick by brick. And I said, Because no one deserves to be left in the cold when they're already carrying all the weight. I never told them what happened. I didn't need to. The building spoke for me. Winter came sooner than usual that year. The same porch where I once lay wrapped in a threadbare blanket, teeth chattering under the stars, now had soft cushions, warm lighting, and a heater humming gently in the corner. I watched as new tenants stepped outside to sip coffee or smoke, their laughter curling into the cold air. None of them knew what that space used to mean to me, and they didn't have to, because now it meant safety, warmth, reclamation. A week before Christmas, my brother came again. He was thinner now, cheeks hollow, ego deflated. He had no entourage, no gold watch, just tired eyes and a folder in hand. "I want to talk," he said through the intercom. I let him in, not out of pity, but because this time I wasn't afraid of what he might say. In the lounge, he laid out the folder. Inside were documents, job applications, rejections, a doctor's note. He had been diagnosed with anxiety, something he used to mock me for. He looked up, voice quiet. I get it now, what it felt like, to be dismissed, to be nothing. For a moment I saw a glimpse of the brother I used to know, before the favoritism, before the power plays. But that moment passed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I believe you," I said, "but that doesn't mean I'll forget." He nodded slowly, then added, "I don't want anything from you, I just didn't want to leave things like that." That was the first time he didn't ask for money, or a place, or a handout, just a moment of honesty. He left with a paper cup of coffee and a scarf I tossed over his shoulder like Mom used to when we were kids. No grand goodbye, just quiet closure. That night, I climbed to the rooftop alone and sat under the stars. The city blinked below like a heartbeat. I held a photo in my hand, not of the past, but a new one. The tenants, the porch, me in the middle, smiling. Not because I was pretending, but because I had built something real. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. It was Rosa, the elderly woman from apartment 3B. "I saw the light," she said. "You okay, sweetheart?" I nodded. "Come on then, we saved you some apple pie." That's when it hit me. I had finally created the family I always wanted. Not through blood, but through grace, grit, and survival. They didn't throw parties without me. They didn't tell me I was too much. They knocked on the door instead of locking it behind them. And that's the thing about doors. Once you own them, you get to choose who walks in and who stays outside. The following spring, I received an envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting. No return address, just my name. Inside was a faded photograph from my childhood. Me and my brother sitting on the steps of our childhood home, sharing a popsicle. Scrawled on the back in her elegant cursive, "We should have protected both of you." A single sentence, no excuses, no begging, just something that almost resembled accountability. Almost. But what moved me more wasn't the photo. It was what I didn't feel. No rage, no grief, just a strange calm that told me I had finally crossed a bridge they refused to follow. Meanwhile, the building flourished. I turned the old basement, once used to store junk, into a community study space. We filled it with donated books, beanbags, and quiet lamps. Local teens came after school. Elderly tenants volunteered to tutor. One of them, Mr. Alvarez, taught Spanish with his old guitar, filling the halls with soft songs and second chances. One evening, during a tenant appreciation dinner I hosted in the courtyard, Rosa raised a toast. To second homes, she said, and the women brave enough to build them from scratch. Everyone clapped, some with tears, some with laughter. That night, I stood by the same door I once cried beside and watched people dance under fairy lights. A boy offered to teach me salsa. I laughed, shaking my head, but joined anyway, barefoot on the warm brick floor. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. My father. He didn't step into the courtyard, just stood across the street, half hidden in shadows. hands in his coat pockets, staring. For a second our eyes met. There was no wave, no smile, just a long look, heavy with everything left unsaid. Regret, shame, distance. He turned away first. I didn't chase him, because I no longer needed closure from people who never offered me safety. I had written my own ending, and it didn't need his signature. Days later, I got a call from a woman I didn't recognize. "I'm your cousin," she said, "from your mom's side. We never got to know each other, but I've been watching what you've done with the building. And I just want to say, you broke the cycle. Thank you." That hit deeper than I expected. Sometimes you don't just escape a legacy, you rewrite it. And I was far from finished. Months passed. The building I once cried in front of became the place people came to feel safe. On Saturday mornings, children laughed in the courtyard as their parents sipped coffee and talked about jobs, dreams, healing. The porch where I was once banished had been completely rebuilt. Not as a place of punishment, but a welcoming front step with sunflowers on each side. And every time I walked past it, I reminded myself, this was mine now. Not just the deed, but the dignity. I had bought more than a building. I had bought back my voice. One afternoon, I found myself sorting through an old box I hadn't touched in years. College acceptance letters, dusty awards, childhood drawings with the word home scribbled in crayon. At the bottom was a list I had written at 16. Things I'll do when I'm free. I had written, own something no one can take from me. Live somewhere I'm not just tolerated but wanted. Laugh without permission. Be seen. Truly seen. One by one, I realized I had checked off every item, without their help, without their approval. My brother? Last I heard, he was crashing on couches, blaming family betrayal for his downfall. My parents? Moved in with a distant relative across the state, quietly removed from the world they once dominated. And me? I was finally, fully at peace. I started hosting workshops in the building, classes for women trying to rebuild their lives after being displaced or belittled by their own families. We cried together, we planned budgets, we practiced job interviews in the mirror, we cheered for each other's wins, no matter how small. One woman said, "You know, this place feels like it was made by someone who's lived through the worst." I smiled and said, "It was." That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I stood on the rooftop, alone. The city was glowing, and for the first time the silence wasn't heavy. It was holy. I thought about all the times I had been made to feel like a burden, an afterthought, a placeholder. And I whispered to the wind, "Look who's on top now." No applause, no fanfare, just peace. And that was the loudest triumph of all.